Good to see everyone this morning. If you would be finding a seat, and we'll begin our Bible class. All right, thank you for the presence of everyone. So thankful to be able to come together and have the beautiful sunshine and the warmer weather today. Amen. All right, before we continue with lesson 2, and we'll be picking up in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Let's run through the 17 time periods again. Before the flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the Exodus, the wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest of Canaan, the divided kingdom, Judah alone, the captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, the life of Christ, the early church, and letters to the Christians. This may not bode well for our clicker life this morning. We'll start the other one. So as just a way of reminder, the passages that we are covering with the United Kingdom, 1 Samuel chapter 10 through 1 Kings chapter 11, 1 Chronicles chapter 10 through 2 Chronicles chapter 9. So very soon we'll finish up with Saul and start solely focusing on David as we get into 2 Samuel. But as I mentioned, we're going to pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're ready for question number 5. And so we're talking about in the midst of the story of David and Goliath. And so I ask, what's the significance of how David responds to Saul's statement, "You are not able," in 1 Samuel 17:33? What application can we make from this? So over in 1 Samuel chapter 17, in verse 33, it says, "Then Saul said to David, 'You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth.'" So obviously, when that is stated to you from the king, especially when you are a young man, that's something that could potentially be very discouraging when he's just flat out telling you, you can't do this. But then David's response, beginning in verse 34, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose against me, I seized him in his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God.' And David said, 'The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine.' And Saul said to David, 'Go, and may the Lord be with you.'" So what's the significance of this, and what can we take away from this? Brother Bill?
David knew that this strength came from the Lord, and he delivered it from the lion and the bear, and that he expected the same outcome with Goliath.
Okay, so David's confidence, regardless of whatever discouraging word Saul wants to throw at him, David had his confidence in the Lord and knew that that was going to be his strength, and God had shown himself faithful previously, and he knew that he would again. Norm?
The Bible very clearly talks about doubt as something that we want to avoid, and it's because of it can paralyze you to do anything. And starting with the top, when doubt was at the top with Saul, it carried right through the entire army. And yet with David, the opposite. He had the confidence. It was confidence of youth, but it was confidence in the right place. It was confidence in God, not in himself. And it's confidence that frees us to act, to move, and to make decisions.
Yeah, you think about that doubt. If anybody has even a hint of doubt, and then someone who would be considered their superior comes to them and says, "You can't do this." I mean, now that little, maybe small amount of doubt just grows. But David had no doubt whatsoever, and he wasn't going to be hindered by what Saul had said to him either. Regina, did you have your hand up? Okay. Francis?
Saul only saw David as the physical, and Saul didn't have the faith that God could even take anybody and get them through this situation. So the human part don't realize what the God part of the person, the faith of the person, or the belief that they can do something. You have to believe it before you can do it.
Yeah. And not relying on your own strength. I think David is probably understanding that he's a shepherd boy, and obviously in stature he's pretty small compared to Goliath, obviously, but he's not trusting in his own strengths or abilities. He's trusting in God's. And so we've talked about this at different times as we've gone through our studies over the last quarter and then the last few weeks as well. But what is one of the things that gives David the strength and the courage to be able to say the things that he said in this face of discouragement? Daddy?
Well, I was thinking, those people there, they shared history. And so David can look back even at the men older, the men in the past. And I'm reminded of Gideon and what his army did. And with going up against something that was insurmountable to man, but with God, all things possible. And that's we're so blessed today to have all these stories ourselves. And so David, I'm sure, was strengthened by what he had already been taught about how God's people survived and lived and put all faith and trust in God.
Yeah, we have pointed out multiple times, if you look just at the children of Israel as a whole, they seem so short-sighted, and they're always looking at the now, and they're the type of people that would have looked at Goliath and not remembered anything that had happened in the past, and that's something that we have to be mindful of. David, of course, would have known those things, and even in his own personal life, he had these experiences to draw from. But oftentimes, people that have a lack of faith, they have those experiences and they don't draw on them. They think, well, this is what's presented to me now, and there's no way. They probably have the attitude that Saul had to him, you can't do this. And oftentimes we have that feeling ourselves. And so we need to be able to draw from our past experiences, and not even just ours, but others that have gone through things and have come through them. And we have to rely on them to help strengthen our faith and know that through God we are able. Norm?
And David's such a great example of, for our young folks, of learning how you build your own faith. David took those experiences, relied on God for the little things, not the big things in life, but the little things, the things he did every day as a shepherd. And as a result of those small building blocks, he was able to build that fortress of faith that he had. And just from things that, I'm sure there were other shepherds out there that did not have the faith of David. David used those things. So just a great example.
Yeah. Todd?
Yeah, God had to teach this mindset to Samuel in the last chapter. Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature. And David, as a young boy, already knows that. It shows how he's a man after God's own heart.
Yes. And while I think we need to take from this that we should be an encouraging people, the fact of the matter is we're going to run across people, and sometimes even our own brothers and sisters, that can be discouraging, and we can't let those things, we can't let negative words discourage us. So from both standpoints, we have to be mindful of that. But this is this is one of the reasons why, and I've said this before, we're not spending a whole lot of time like talking about the story. I'm really wanting to try to make as much application to ourselves as we can, and I think David is such a good example and something that we need to be mindful of, and he's still young. We're going to talk more as we continue on about the great character of David. Anything else on number 5? All right, question number 6. What's the significance of David refusing Saul's armor and the weaponry David chose to fight Goliath with? That's there in verses 39 and 40 of chapter 17. David girded the sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. What's significant about that, Drew?
I mean, it shows his faith, but it also shows wisdom as well on his part. He did those things with just hindering.
Yeah. Yeah, I love, I mean, he says it twice there, I have not tested them. And so I'm also thinking about the situation that we are in the midst of with appointing deacons, and let them first be tested. And Obviously, there's a point to things being tested. And David, yes, outside of his faith in God, he's recognizing, I've not tested these things. These are actually going to be more of a hindrance than they would be to a help to me. And obviously, from a human standpoint, if you're going to go into battle, it makes all the sense in the world to have armor on. We talk about the armor of the Lord because armor is important, but it was not something that David worried about. He wasn't worried about the human resources that he was or had at his disposal. It was more about just going with what he knew and what he had, and knowing that God was going to again be with him. Other comments? All right, number 7. Explain the relationship between Jonathan and David. How do we know it was not a homosexual relationship, as many in the world proclaim? And I say consider also 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 25 through 27. And when I was coming up with these questions, I was talking about it with the kids as well, and I guess that's not something that most of our kids probably recognize, and Zoe was like, what? But one of the things, I'll tell you, I do try to look for different, pictures of the events or the people, and there are pictures that you can find portraying David and Jonathan as having a homosexual relationship, and this is something that is definitely discussed within the world. So, Norm, go ahead.
This is such a beautiful example of the biblical term of brotherly love. This is that special relationship that you can have that just crosses all boundaries. Very different from the marital relationship. Different kind of love, but they have some characteristics in there. But this idea of brotherly love is the standard that we should try to meet with each other in the church.
Okay. So, good example of a biblical friendship, and we'll talk more about this even in our next lesson. Did I say another hand, Francis?
They were true companions to serve the Lord. Their souls were knit together. God knows the soul. Homosexual actions are a sin, and God cannot be with the soul of such a person.
Okay. Yeah, and that's one of the passages I had even pulled out. It says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And if you think about this idea of knitting, and yes, oftentimes we would think of it in terms of the marriage relationship, but I think that it does emphasize the connection that they had. But where did that connection come from? And Francis kind of hit on that. Norm?
Yeah, their focus on God. They were both traveling the same path together, and only if they're traveling the same path together could they be knit together. And we're to knit ourselves to God in the same way, our souls.
Yeah. And I think about, not being unequally yoked together, and we use that in reference to the marriage sometimes, but again, yes, as Norm was saying, they were knit together in their faithfulness to the Lord. And when you want to talk about a biblical friendship, that's what we want. We want a friend who is in the same path that we are in, and willing to make sacrifices, and willing to have that loyalty that we see here with Jonathan and David. I see another hand. So over in 2 Samuel chapter 1, so in verses 25 through 27, it says, "How have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of a woman. How have the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perish?" So, again, that's just one of the passages that people will use to try to get you to think that they were in a homosexual relationship. But Francis actually talked about just the morality of it. And so we know if their faithfulness is to the Lord, that's their concern. But also I think that culturally speaking, and this is something that we probably don't think about or recognize as much as they did in those times, and even in our Eastern countries, things that I have read talk about the friendships that even the women have with the women and the men have with men, and it is more of an emotional bond that they have for one another. But within the cultural context, that's not something that would have been allowed even at this time either. But with that, with the biblical morality, and what do we know? What else do we know about David that would kind of lend itself to they didn't have a homosexual relationship? What's that?
His love for women.
Right, and he was married multiple times. So I think we've got a lot of these things that we can look to and recognize the difference between a true biblical friendship that they had that was definitely something that benefited the both of them, and how different that was from a sexual relationship. Anything else on number 7? Go ahead, Norm.
The other thing we need to think about in answering that question is just the idea that you have the spiritual relationship, and then there's a physical relationship. The benefit to the marital relationship is the physical relationship that you have there is of a sexual nature, whereas in the brotherly love, the physical relationship is the idea of a oneness going in the same direction in life as far as going. Now that would be nice on the marital relationship too, but that's the special part of a brother, or a sister relationship. It's just there because you go in the same area and you just enjoy, being together. That's the physical, part of that.
Yeah.
That can be very different.
It can be very different, but I'm glad you just said that because I actually hadn't thought about this. But if you want to talk about the marriage relationship, this is the type of friend you want from your spouse. So, yes, there is a sexual component to that, but you want a biblical friendship and someone that is going to be loyal and is faithful to the Lord and serving the Lord just like you. So, those of you that aren't married, that's what you should be looking for. Anything else? Go ahead, Todd.
It's such a shame that conversation comes up. Our modern times are so hyper-sexualized, and so it's easy to read too much into these biblical texts with the 2024 or 2025, taint. Because this type of friendship is what God wants for man. It's such a blessing, and we need to show this to our children, because you hate for the kids to grow up in this twisted society where it's like, boy, I really like that other kid. He and I are just so alike, and we see things the same way. Maybe I'm gay. That's a terrible thought to have enter that child's mind. When it's like, no, you've been blessed with a friend, and how wonderful is that?
Yeah, and if David and Jonathan displayed that friendship in our local high schools, they'd be called gay. And so, yes, it is something that we need to be mindful of with our children, and it is a friendship that they should have. But, yeah, it's disappointing, the society that we live in. Question number 8. Saul's jealousy toward David intensifies throughout this chapter, chapter 18, verses 10 through 16. How does jealousy manifest in Saul's actions, and what are the consequences of allowing jealousy to control our emotions and decisions? What steps can we take to combat jealousy in our own hearts, especially in our relationship with others? Miss Shirley?
Saul was so afraid of David that he kept a spear by his side all the time. And he was afraid of him, mostly because God was with him, and he knew that.
Okay, so the jealousy of the fact that God was with him, and it had been made very clear that he was not with Saul anymore. And so, yes, that's it now manifesting itself in Saul's actions, where he's attempting to kill Saul or kill David. What else? What was Saul's other concern? Lena?
Popularity.
Yes.
Not just that God is with him, but the people are with him. Those women that think that
Yeah, yeah, we've talked about that some with the situation, even with Saul's sinfulness and not really wanting to own up to it, but even asking Samuel, well, okay, will you at least come back and pray with me with the people? Let's at least let it look like I'm still the king. And I think he did have this fear of his lack of popularity compared to David and just overall losing control. And I think that was definitely on display with his jealousy. And when you think about the beginning of their relationship and how good of a relationship that could have been, and ultimately the relationship is totally destroyed because of Saul's jealousy. And ultimately what you see is this is Saul's sole focus, and it's almost like he's completely forgot about being king and ruling the children of Israel, and it's more about this is my focus, and it leads really to self-sabotage, and he's harming himself because of it. He starts isolating himself more, and you can just see the toll that it takes on Saul, and it is all because of this jealousy. And if you look at James chapter 3 and verse 16, it says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. And that describes the situation that we have here with Saul and with David. So this is something that obviously we have to deal with ourselves, even within the church. Jealousy is a very real thing. God talks about it multiple times. And so how can we combat that? Shirley?
I think we all have our own purpose, so we need to concentrate on that instead of looking at what others have.
Yes. Yeah, I think that recognizing our own talents and abilities and recognizing that we're all different and we don't have the same talents and abilities, but focusing on ours. And I think that being grateful for what we do have and showing a little bit of gratitude and focus on that gratitude, helping us to appreciate the blessings that we have and not staying so focused on somebody else. What else? Francis?
Well, it's stated that we don't know the soul of another person, but God does. And if we try to assume something, and it could be totally wrong. So even though you feel there's some kind of tension or stress or something between you and somebody else, just pray to God and leave it to Him. And it's hard, but a lot of people say a lot of things that are not true. And the best thing you keep in your mind is that's an opinion. It's not anything other than a personal opinion.
Yeah. So what's the other characteristic that Saul has that kind of cultivates this jealousy?
Always looking out for himself.
Okay, so yeah, there's a sense of selfishness. It's a P word. Marissa said pride. So yes, obviously we see a stark contrast between the pride of Saul and the humility that David has. And so I think that's something that we need to learn, is we need to not let our pride get in the way and try to be more humble. And one of the things that I think we need to do more of is we oftentimes, because of our jealousy, somebody will have an accomplishment, and maybe even one of our brothers and sisters, and we don't want to rejoice with them. We get upset. And obviously in Romans chapter 12, verse 15, we're called to rejoice with those who rejoice. And so we should celebrate each other. Whenever we have successes, we need to celebrate each other, and so that we can cultivate this mentality of joy for each other and not jealousy. Norm, do you have your hand up?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, anything else on number 8? Question number 9. What character traits do we see in David in chapters 16 through 19, and what lessons can we learn from David in these chapters? And there's a lot of them. Norm?
I'll get started. Courage.
Okay, so we've talked about his courage, obviously, there with David. That's on full display, and something that, yes, we definitely need to have more of. Lena?
Wisdom, my favorite verse probably among these is David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And then it repeats later in the same
Yes. So, yeah, when you want to contrast, Saul and David, the wisdom that he had from his youth, the discretion that came from his wisdom and how he handled these situations with Saul is something that is definitely something that we need to mimic as well. What else? Miss Shirley?
I think he was a servant. I mean, he went to Saul and played music for him through his soul. So he was.
Yes. And even though in this situation he's been anointed, he recognizes that Saul is still the king, and so he's serving Saul as the Lord would have him to. And so, yeah, that kind of servant's attitude, because he does have a heart for God. Norm? There is a lot of patience and restraint that is displayed by just in general, but again, of someone that's a young, having that restraint. And again, where does that come from? His love for God. And so all of these characteristics and qualities that we're talking about, with the courage and the wisdom and the patience. We talked about the relationship with Jonathan, so the loyalty and the friendship that he has. I mentioned some about his humility, which kind of goes along with his willingness to serve, like Miss Shirley said. All of these come back to his faithfulness to the Lord and his desire to serve the Lord.
Your song is sending him out to battle against Philistines and hoping maybe something might happen to him. But he went, and of course God gave him the victory. But that wasn't Saul's intent. But he was still obedient to what the king had commanded him to do.
Yes, absolutely. Anything else there on? Go ahead, Jesse.
I think it's interesting, very early on, when this distressing spirit comes on Saul, and one of his servants speaks up, what is already known about David, and I don't know how it was necessarily known, but he states, David, the son of Jesse, he's a mighty man of valor, he's prudent in speech, the Lord is with him. So that's pretty impressive, very early on in this beginning of the relationship. This is known about David.
Yeah. So again, from again being young, but these things are already, these characteristics and good qualities are already something that everyone else is speaking about and knows about David. Anything else on number 9? All right, question number 10. What's the significance of the events of 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 22 through 24? So we've got, obviously, Saul is continuing his jealous ambition in trying to kill David. And so he learns where David is at, so he sends an army, and they arrive, and the Spirit comes over them, and they begin to prophesy, preventing them from being able to pursue David. So Saul hears, he sends another army, and same thing happens, and Saul's like, okay, I'll take care of it. So then Saul goes, and the Spirit of the Lord comes over Saul, and he strips himself naked, and he also begins prophesying with the prophets. What's significant about that? Norm?
Reminds me of Balaam Balak. No matter what, God's in total control. No matter who you send, they're going to do what God wants.
Okay. There's another similar story that I hope we can see from this. Daddy?
Earlier in his life, he prophesied as well, 1 Samuel chapter 10. That's what you're referring to.
Yes, that's, if you actually go back to the very beginning of Saul, the way Saul is pictured in his fall mirrors almost exactly Saul's rise. And so Saul came to Samuel at Ramah when he was declared to be king. That's back in chapter 9 and verse 6. Now he's coming to Samuel at Ramah when he's losing his kingship, chapter 19, verse 22. Saul came asking for directions at the well to find Samuel, chapter 9, verse 11. And now he's coming asking directions, looking for Samuel again in chapter 19, verse 22. Saul is anointed, and he prophesies with a group of prophets over in chapter 10, verses 5 and 6. And now he prophesies with a group of prophets again in chapter 19, verse 23. And the first time, the people are marveling that Saul is able to do this. And the second go around, they're actually ridiculing him because he is doing this. And then finally, we see the Spirit of the Lord come on Saul with authority there in chapter 11 and verse 6. And now the Spirit of the Lord comes on Saul and really kind of sends him in the other direction to where he loses his clothing. And I think that there is some symbolism there with his losing his authority for being king. And I think it's also interesting that he takes off his kingly garments, and what we see is Jonathan willingly then yields his clothing to David, the anointed one. So I think that there's so much between mirroring the story of his rise and now the story of his fall and his kingly garments coming off and Jonathan giving them to David. And Saul, obviously, he's taking his clothes off unwillingly, and something that, again, is through the Lord. So it's just very interesting to me with the fall versus the rise of Saul. Anything else on number 10? All right, let's move on to lesson number 4. All right, so we've already talked some about the friendship of Jonathan and David. So question number 1 on lesson 4 was, how does Jonathan's loyalty to David, despite his father's animosity, challenge our understanding of family loyalty and faithfulness to God's will? In what ways can we apply this principle in our own relationships, particularly when loyalty to family conflicts with loyalty to God's plans? Francis?
I said that we should not put anything or anyone above God.
Okay. So obviously put God first, so don't put anything or anyone above God. What else? Lena?
Well, I think to go into the previous chapter, also chapter 19, we see that Jonathan tries to reason with his father at first and explain to the father that his wrath and anger over David is unreasonable. So he doesn't just like go away to his friend and betray his father. He tries to show Saul what needs to be done, his attitude. I don't know, I can't finish my thought.
So what, in a normal situation where you have a king, who should be next to be king? Okay, so and we haven't talked about that, but Jonathan is technically the heir to the throne in the way that we would view it. And so to me, that just puts a whole nother layer of the humility and the character of Jonathan, because at no point does he show any form of jealousy, and he recognizes that David is God's chosen. Over in chapter 23 and verse 15, it says, "Now David became aware that Saul had come out to seek his life while David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horesh and encouraged him in God. Thus he said to him, 'Do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. Saul my father knows this also.'" And to me, there's a hint maybe of what we see with Moses, where Moses, as opposed to staying in his role and enjoying the comforts of life as the second in command in Egypt, we have this with Jonathan too. Jonathan, again, he's the heir to the throne, he's the next, and he gives all of that up. Whatever comforts he may have had, he gives all that up because he knows that's not God's will. Even though this is his father, he recognizes the kingdom is not going to stay with my father, and it is going to go with David. And so while we do see this friendship, I think that it is also based on the fact that Jonathan's faith in God and obedience to God is going to help him to sacrifice even himself to be able to support David and the Lord's wishes. Go ahead, Norm.
We talked earlier about their souls being knitted together. This is a great example of it, because here Jonathan is willing. He's basically saying God has chosen David.
So how can we apply this to ourselves? Todd?
Well, David's he is a type of Christ, right? He's the Lord's anointed, which means Christ. He's got all these wonderful qualities. So that makes Jonathan like the one who finds the Messiah, the one who loves Christ. And Saul is very much like the Jews who are just jealous of the Christ and they're wanting to kill him. So it's very common that a person who realizes just how much Christ has done for you, you develop great faith and you want to follow him, and then you look back at your family and say, wouldn't you guys also like to come? And they're like, no, not interested. And now you've got this conflict in your life, and thankfully in Christ you find comfort and friendship and family to replace what you lose.
Yeah, one of the questions that we'll get to probably next week, but I'm asking the question about the pictures that you see of the anointed, and we see so many, especially through 1 Samuel and just the story of David. Did I see another hand, Daddy?
This is an example we can all look back on concerning our family. What impresses me so much, Jonathan and David both loved God and served God, but Jonathan never left his father. He never left Israel. They even died together in war. So there's so much conflict there. I know that Jonathan, the man, had to struggle all through his life, knowing what his responsibility was to his family and to Israel, and still have the close relationship with David that he had. There's probably many of us in this room that have been, have the same situation where, family is not serving God, but yet we still have a certain responsibility to our family to do whatever we can to get them to change. And I'm sure Jonathan was constantly working his father to do that. His father even tried to kill him, but he still served his father out of respect and love for him and Israel.
The easiest thing for Jonathan to have done would have been to probably go hide with David and just hang out with David, and we don't see that he ever did that. So one of the things, and Brent, can you ring the bell for us? One of the things that I think about is when you are someone whose family did not, as we would say, grow up in the church and maybe have never been Christians, and to see someone develop their faith and become a Christian, separate and apart from even their upbringing and how difficult that can be. But I'm also reminded of what Jesus said and when he's talking to his disciples about the cost of discipleship, and this is in Luke, but also in Matthew. In Matthew chapter 10, in verse 34, it says, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be the members of his household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will lose it." So Jesus obviously is not teaching that we should abuse our families in any way. That's not what he's getting at. But he is urging us, kind of like what Sister Frances said, our loyalty first should be to the Lord. And all of the relationships that we have outside of maybe the marriage relationship, the relationship between parents and a child is something that is going to be challenging when they are not, either one or the other is not faithful to the Lord. And we've already talked multiple times, even within just the book of 1 Samuel, how oftentimes parents don't do what they should, and they show their faithfulness to their children more than they do the Lord. We saw that with Eli. And it's just something that we have to be mindful of. It doesn't matter, which direction it goes, from parent to child or from child to parent. But we definitely need to serve the Lord first, and as my dad said, while still being faithful to our parents as well. Anything else on number 1? All right, question number 2. So this kind of goes a little bit deeper into the relationship of Jonathan and David, and it says, "Explain the benefit of the relationship between Jonathan and David is shown in these chapters, and what do the Scriptures teach us about this type of relationship? So what else can we learn in looking at some other Scriptures? Miss Shirley?
Well, when Jonathan found out that his father really hated David, he went to David and told him, and he helped David escape.
Okay. What are some other passages that you can think of that kind of help us understand the benefit of this biblical friendship that we've talked about? Todd?
I like Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 10. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up.
Yes. And I think that oftentimes we use that also in the connection with marriage, but there's much there that we can take just from our friendships and our relationships, and we should strive to be that source of strength and that source of encouragement to each other. Francis?
Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born of
Adversity, yes. Proverbs 17:17. So what does that mean, a friend loves at all times? What does that mean friendship is not? It's not conditional, exactly. It's not a matter of convenience, because obviously this situation, it was not convenient whatsoever for Jonathan to be a friend with David. But yeah, it's about true commitment and true loyalty to one another. Francis?
In Proverbs 18:24, a man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother.
Okay.
In order for a person, an example with Jonathan and David, they had shared both felt the same, I can depend on you, relationship. And if you have that, it doesn't matter if you haven't seen him in 20 years. If they call, you're going to be there.
Yes.
But yet you've got people that say that you're friends with, and if you don't call them in 2 months, well, who called who last? Well, I don't keep up with that because a friend doesn't do that anyway.
So the New American Standard there says, a man of too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And I can't help but think about this situation in our world of social media, and it's, well, how many friends do you have? Okay. I don't care what your social media thing says of who is your friend. The value of a deep, genuine friendship is far superior than 1,000 superficial ones. So we need to strive to have the type of friendship that David and Jonathan had. All right, thanks, everybody. We'll pick up with question number 3. Actually, not next week, so in 2 weeks.